Okay, welcome everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and if people continue to filter in, that's great. My name is Peter. I work here at Amplify Arts, and we're really thankful to have you all here for tonight's alternate currents panel discussion, Commonplace Collective Learning Outside the Institution, with our panelists, Cass Eddington, Alex O'Hanlon, Valerie St. Pierre Smith, and our moderator, Amanda Huckins. They'll introduce themselves to you in just a minute. But for anybody who's new to Amplify or joining us for the first time, Alternate Currents is one of our cornerstone programs that really works to center critical discussion and collaboration as tools for building activist-oriented practices. It includes this discussion series, a blog, and a working group of artists and organizers who kind of hold everything together. And tonight's discussion is just one in a year-long series that investigates how regenerative economies and alternative modes of exchange can bring about more just and equitable futures, not just for artists, but for everybody. So our panelists will be in conversation with each other for between 40 and 45 minutes before we open up the floor to questions. But the Q&A function and the chat function will be active throughout. So please feel free to share your thoughts anytime. I'll also mention just really quickly that a video and transcript of tonight's discussion with links to more articles and resources will be posted to the Alternate Currents blog in a couple weeks. So you can find it there along with a lot of other great discussions like this. It's on our website at amplifyarts.org. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate your willingness to engage in critical discussion with us. Thank you to the Sherwood Foundation, whose support makes programs like Alternate Currents possible. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Amanda.
Great. Hello, and thanks for joining us. My name is Amanda Huckins. I'm part of this year's Alternate Currents Working Group at Amplify. And my interest in education comes partially from the fact that I'm an early educator, and I've also been involved in some DIY spaces that focus on skill sharing and education. So really excited to talk to our panelists tonight about their experiences with institutions and outside of institutions. So we're going to go around and just panelists are going to offer some background about themselves and just a little bit about how to contextualize this conversation and where they're coming from. And then we'll jump into some discussion questions and go crazy. So, all right. If you want to start, Valerie.
Sure. Miigwech buju indinawe maganadok. Megabwa ojidajukwe indigenicas. Hello, all of my relatives. My name is Valerie St. Pierre Smith. I just shared a traditional greeting in Anishinaabe. I am a two-spirit multimedia artist, textile artist, designer, healer, and have worn also the hat of official educator, helming the costume design program at two different universities, most recently at University of Nebraska, Omaha. And I've always had a lifelong fascination with the concept, what we conceptualize as Western education, and all the other ways there are of learning. And now that I also have 3 kids of my own and have stepped both in and outside of academia, it has just gotten to be a much deeper field, an area of discussion, and one that I think impacts us in ways that we have yet to even unpack. I'm happy to be with everybody tonight, too.
All right, Cass, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Cass Eddington. I am a trans ex-Mormon poet, educator, and community arts organizer with quite a bit of institutional background. Currently finishing up my PhD. I'm a PhD candidate in University of Denver's Creative Literary Arts program, and former Denver Quarterly poetry editor. But outside of that, adjacent to through institutions, I've also taught English language learners, adult English language learners, facilitated creative writing workshops for incarcerated youth, and taught community writing classes, and worked in community arts organization. And I created and curate Vocational Poetics, which is a platform with both in-person and online classes that works to create spaces of accessibility and creative sovereignty and radical communion for writers.
All right, thank you. And Alex, if you go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Alex O'Hanlon. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I guess like the ways that I engage with like informal education, in my job, I work at One Omaha, and we do a lot of like support for neighborhood organizers. So I'll coordinate a lot of trainings about like how the city works, like how transportation works, how development works. And so kind of trying to find like who has the information, and then how can we package this information in a way that is not only like interesting and consumable, but also like usable. And then beyond that, I've also taught English before. That was a while ago. But I also teach, I guess I like participate in a lot of like collective gardening projects. And I've been gardening and like farming for the last 12 years. So I feel like I've picked up some tricks along the way, and especially the seed saving cooperative, the Blazing Star Seed Cooperative that I'm a part of. I'm like really, really into learning about seed saving, and like make it a point to like go out and learn from others. And then like one of the best ways that like that could get deeper into me is to like immediately turn around and explain what I just learned to somebody else, like while trying to do it. Be like, I think what he said was to do this. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to kind of get into some like background about our just core beliefs and our like path in education, going a little beyond introductions. So my first question, and whoever wants to take this first, just jump in. What is the most valuable to you information or skill set that you've acquired? And if you could tell us where that was, what context it was in, from who, and like what makes it so significant to you. Cass, I know you said you had notes. Oh, Valerie, okay.
I'll go ahead and jump in. So this question actually gave me some serious pause, because I'm at a certain stage of my life where I'm not as young as I used to be. And having realizing that I've learned so much through different avenues and for different reasons, that for me, what I realized, this definition is continually changeable. So depending on how old I've been, I will answer this question very, very differently. And when I was younger, I certainly would have said like skill set, especially being a costume designer and fashion designer. There's so much that goes into that. I inherently fell into it, but also my mom is a first generation American and my father's mixed race Native man. And the idea of formal education was very big in our house as a way of establishing economic stability and resilience. And so the idea, neither of them got to go to college or finish college. So that was always like, for me, that became incorporated in my life dreams, was to go to college and to graduate from college, because I saw how much it meant to my mom and she didn't get to do it. And so that there was a whole set of stuff I had to figure out to do that. But then having gotten through college and gotten the diploma and gotten into the job and career and all that kind of stuff, what I realized was how much I missed in terms of awareness and the sort of self-awareness skills and self-conscious skills, in the sense of knowing how to work and knowing how to boundary and how to relationship build and kind of all of those things. So I feel like at a different time in my life, the skills have been very important that have come from both traditional and what we think of as conventional institutional means, but then also as I've gotten older and built that awareness of myself and figuring out how I want to navigate, were a lot of ancestral teachings. And I am mixed race Anishinaabe, and so actually with some of the biggest and most valuable information and knowledge that I've learned is my Anishinaabe language, because the language is an animate language and it communicates in a way that is so different from English, which is what so many of our inherited concepts and notions and perspectives are based on, that are inanimate ideas. like there's just, and I could go on about that because I find it fascinating, but so it's kind of built and it's changed over the years, but it's all sort of made it into this soup of realizing, and also realizing too, watching my kids who are now early teenagers, to be honest, there are certain moments in our lives that we are, I swear to God, and I will argue with anybody, I don't care how much research you have behind you, that as we grow in our life, we are hardwired to learn from the community and to learn from an elder population and our aunties and our uncles, and not necessarily, it's not just from like a parent or an immediate family sense. And that's been tried, that's what's been institutionalized that I struggle with watching my kids, is it's been institutionalized to the point of being myopic and not the rich, broad, intergenerational teachings and wisdoms that get shared and passed on, which I miss. We started off in a Montessori setting with them and watching them shift from a multi-age classroom where, kind of like what Alex was saying, well, if you have to turn around and explain it to somebody, it's a really good way of learning something, to a very institutionalized public school. And I'm totally not anti-public school, that's a different conversation entirely, but it's just a very, very different system and much more compartmentalized. And so missing that sort of community, ancestral, experiential watching, really watching and then learning and then kind of doing and all that stuff, I've become keenly aware of how important that is.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. I mean, yeah, I guess like I don't want to underemphasize like the institutional privilege that I have from the resources that I have had as a result of those experiences. And then, you know, like I think learning to navigate those resources intellectually, creatively, relationally, materially was something huge that came from those experiences, as well as opportunities to grow as a teacher, which is work that I feel called to. And, you know, that those experiences didn't come without a cost. And so before even entering the institution of like academia and higher education, I was like very insulated within like Mormon culture and religion in Utah. And so I feel like a lot of what, like, I should rephrase this so that it's like not a negative, but like the skill set that I've learned is like what a lack of personal authority and relationships of institutional dependency create, and what altering this relationship looks like. The structure of academia helped me leave Mormonism, whose resources and community I was culturally, intellectually, and materially dependent upon. Growing up in Utah County, where I was raised by a single mom in government subsidized housing projects. And, you know, academia also perpetuated many of the self-limiting narratives that I was taught in Mormonism at the same time that I was given access to like a wealth of resources to navigate my way out of those situations. I also, you know, like, I don't know, like academia did not teach me how to create and access community. I don't think that is its function. And so I feel like what I was given was like a hunger and a desire to figure out how to do that, because I also didn't have like good models for what that looked like in a healthy way, growing up culturally. And then, you know, related to that, right? Like, despite receiving Pell Grants and teaching assistantships and fellowships and scholarships, I incurred debt from student loans, which is accrued with significant interest. But I refer to this debt as like the price required to escape the limitations of my circumstances. And so I'm like very interested in, yeah, for many reasons, very interested in like what happens outside of the limitations of the institution, and what other economies we can imagine.
Yeah, I think that's like a pretty intense question, like the most important thing you've ever learned. But I think like what comes to mind for me is just like curiosity and observation. And I think like in academia, like observation might be critical thinking, you know, those things might be considered critical thinking. But when I think of them like in relation to, so I like, you know, went to like the 13 years of K through 12, and then I did 4 years at university and studied like history and philosophy. So spent a lot of time thinking, and then after that, like moved on to kind of like traveling around and working on lots of different farms, and kind of like had this idea when I was studying philosophy. I studied meta ethics, which is like just the most like institutional thing you can study, you know, like it's like how do we have a conversation about a conversation sort of thing. And but it's really cool. It's kind of about like if there's ethics, like what types of things are there, what types of things are they, what would the science of them be? And I was kind of like, I can't think that hard about this. Like I really want to think hard about this, but like I need to be doing, like I need to have like a really tangible aspect. Like I can't just think about what's good all the time. Like I need to decide like what feels good enough and like start trying to do that. And so, you know, with farming, it's like a lot of times there's this like people are like, oh, you should read this book, or like there's like YouTube videos or stuff like that. And like it's like, to me, that also still never felt tangible to like read about like how to harvest a potato. I'm just kind of like, okay, stick the shovel 6 inches deep. Like, what does that look like on a shovel, you know? So for me, it was like really doing, and I had like a lot of direct opportunities to do that. And like, so it's like observation and then curiosity, because like to learn these things, like you think like, oh, I'm going to go work on a farm for 1 year and then I'll just know how to do it. And it's like, no, you can go work on a farm for 1 year and you'll get an idea of maybe the questions you can ask in years 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then after that, you can get an idea of the questions you ask in year 9 through 12. And I'll let you know what comes after that soon. But so it's like, it's this continual like need to observe, and like you're not failing at the end of the year if everything didn't go as planned. Like you make a plan, and you make a really good plan so that you can pivot constantly within that plan, you know? And so throughout that, you need to observe, like, what did you think was going to happen? What actually did happen? What was within your ability to control? What was outside of your ability to control? Can you control the things that were within your ability this year? Will you ever control the things that are outside of your ability? Will they happen again? So it's like, and that can seem overwhelming, but if you're like curious and it's interesting to you, then it's the most interesting, then it's like so fun to talk about. And it's so great to like, it can be fun to do alone, but it's way funner to do with like other people, to be like, oh, you didn't observe that, or, oh, you think a different thing caused that. And so in a way, it's like you can totally intellectualize it, but you're constantly also like holding on to things. So you're not losing that reality of what you're doing. And then I think that, you know, also in that process, maybe a good thing to like learn is like how to communicate. Because there's a lot of people I learned from that like made me cry. But I still learned something from them. But there's a lot of people that I learned from that didn't make, or maybe they made me cry from like feeling good. And I feel like that's really important to like be able to communicate things and provide space for people to make mistakes, but like also like come together with a lesson, like, but like both of you are learning the lesson, not like, now did you see what happened, but like, okay, so we both saw that didn't work, or we both saw that part of it worked. And I think that's really important because you know, even though you can learn from somebody that maybe isn't a great communicator, you can learn so much more and so many different things from somebody that has that skill, although you can learn that skill from somebody that lacks that skill as well.
So I'm hearing some really interesting threads about, you know, how how we can learn from what we aren't taught. And, you know, that negative space almost creates like a motivation to find what we didn't get. And I think we were talking about education as preparation too there, Alex. You kind of brought up the fact that it feels like traditional kinds of education are often purporting to give you what you need to then do it after you're done learning all of the things you need. So our next question was kind of supposed to be about what are the primary challenges of traditional education. I think we've already started to get into that a little bit. I want to ask you all to maybe elaborate a little more on like a specific challenge for yourself, like something that you've experienced and a way that you have in your practice, your like pedagogical practice or your teaching practice or learning practice, like some way that you've responded to a challenge that you've experienced that's really particular to like what you're doing now. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I wanted to offer, and it might tie into this, something you said, Amanda, and something that I'd mentioned before was language. And you talk about traditional education. We're not talking about traditional education. We're talking about conventional Western institutions of education, which funnily enough, actually, for me, has been one of my primary challenges because I was very proud of being a product, given my family history and expectations and what I didn't know and what it launched me into doing. Looking back on it, I realized I was super lucky / grateful that I went through it in a creative field. I think my soul would have died, even though I had all these great intellectual pursuits, and I'm not even gonna tell you how many colleges I went to before I graduated and how many majors I went through, but finally getting out of it and having gone through it in theater and theatrical design, I had a very different experience of it, I think, coming out the other side. But one of the primary challenges was then spending, and it still has been when I got into the classroom and became a teacher, was really starting to understand how much of the, and I hesitate to say colonial, so I do a lot of decolonizing work in design and art and creative practices in my own life and in my own practice. And I actually hate the word colonizing because it goes much farther back than just what we think of as colonial settlers that came to the United States. But when I got into the classroom was really having to start picking apart and teasing apart what I held as firm beliefs and understandings and my knowledge of the creative experience and what I thought was what I didn't get, kind of what we were saying, right? Like I didn't learn this stuff until I got out, so I want to work it into my curriculum. But then also realizing that the curriculum and the structure itself was at odds with my internal understanding, experience, and view of teaching. And so for several years when I first started teaching, I was replicating the experience that I had and trying to like kind of fill in the gaps a little bit until I realized that aside from student evaluations, nobody was watching over me, right? Like nobody, so I was like, wait, why am I'm perpetuating so much of what I inherited, what was passed on as conventional, even beyond just the like, here's your costume history. And of course it's all, English and French and, sort of that very Eurocentric view, but even just in the words and the way I was approaching projects and assignments and information gathering and how I was spouting it out. So for me, massive challenge was feeling confident enough to be able to, excuse my language, shit can all that, for lack of a better word, and just create something that I felt better served the entire community, better served the student, what I was going for, because I do still think of it as like, I do have goals when I'm in the classroom, but trying to make it more ecumenical and look like something that I, kind of like what Cass was saying, no model, I didn't take classes like that, like restructuring a system that I'm in the process of just discovering myself how I'm trying to take it apart and reframe it. And where it's safe, because I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of space in formal and institutional education that isn't safe for me and for how I teach or how I view and understand knowledge and wisdom keeping. And even in my heritage, when I'm sharing, you know, my views and perspectives, which are very much Anishinaabe culture and from my ancestral teachings, they very much are, I don't want to say it at odds with, but they are very much outside of what we're normally taught, but then also straddle the line of being accused of appropriation. And it's like, well, so that's a whole other conversation of the ability to change and manifest and shift, respectfully working in. Being mixed is really a pain in the ass sometimes because you're not allowed to be. Like, you kind of have to pick one track or the other. And so trying to find the liminal spaces and pulling it all together to be able to teach from that has been a big challenge.
A lot of what you're saying, Valerie, resonates, especially in terms of like being in the classroom and trying to teach in a way that like, yeah, that feels like it's integrity with your own experiences, but having never necessarily received those models. Like, yeah, I you know, I shudder to think of like my first like few years of teaching, but also I think that that's normal. Coming from the spaces that we have come from. Yeah, I think the fact that like so many, and I, you know, like, no, this is no one person, this is such a like structural violence issue, that the educational spaces do not understand the needs and the unique qualities of the populations they serve. And, you know, I think that happens really early on. And yeah, I feel like for me, because education was like an anchor, I'm trying to figure out the right, like, there, you know, it seems as though like, oh, I've gotten this far in education, this must be an indicator of like, especially in like creative degrees, right? Like my relationship with my own creativity or like my own self-worth. But, you know, like, I think that people pleasing as a survival mechanism can't really be understated. And that, especially like, you know, oh, I need this resource. And if in order to get this resource, I perform this way, and then I get that resource, which is reinforced by everything, right? Like funding, everything that you apply for, and everything that I succeeded at seemed to reinforce that, right? And so it creates like a relationship to authority that I think undermines our own relationship to our self-worth and our own like ability to like explore that even, and to develop like any kind of self-sovereignty. I know there are like debates about like self-sovereignty versus interdependence, but like coming from a place in which like I was very put in a position of dependence, I feel like that idea of self-sovereignty along with interdependence is really important to me. And I did, you know, I felt like, yeah, despite all of that time, I really had to redevelop a relationship to my own creative practice and my own creativity, and undo the sort of unintentional harm of like a lot of those structures. And yeah, like I think that like, as someone who sort of thrives with some degree of like healthy stress, sometimes unhealthy stress, that's worked, right? But it was not ultimately, I think, healthy for me. And the higher I got in my educational journey, the more I realized that those spaces were not designed for people like me. Like, for example, being expected to not work for a summer while studying for comprehensive exams in the PhD. So yeah, I don't know. There's like, yeah, there's like such a deep relationship with one's own process that I don't feel like I was given access to or encouraged to explore, has become really important to me in my own work and in my teaching, and something that I'm like continually working to better understand through like process-based artists. And well, we'll get into that more later, so I'll stop.
Yeah, so when I think about this question, I think for me, like when I was teaching English, that was one of like the first times, or that one of the only times I've ever been in like the maybe sort of like authoritative role of a teacher. And I was 19 and like everybody I was teaching was like twice my age. So I mean, I didn't have a lot of that I didn't get the experience of like owning the room or something from that. And then like now, like I have taught like classes at like City Sprouts and stuff about like, bugs in the garden or weeds or, how to turn over your soil. And in that role, you're kind of like, you're in front of a group of people. The classes are free. So you're in front of a group of people who are like wanting information from you, right? And so there is something of like this, like I'm at the front of the room and you're sitting down, and so like now I'm going to tell you what's up. But even in those spaces, it's like I was fairly young, and like I was saying before, I was like maybe 6 or 7 years into gardening, so there's a lot I still didn't know, and I could really only communicate like my experiences. And like really tried hard to communicate my experiences and not thing that I read in a book, but had never actually tried. So I don't really do classes like that anymore. Except if you wanted to learn to like process seeds, you could come to seed processing days every Sunday in October from 12 to noon at Reformed on 20th and Vinton. But even like situations like that, it's like, I'm very much like not the teacher, but maybe just like the person who has the most experience that is currently here. But there's also, so I guess like the challenge is, how do you teach, communicate without hierarchy? And like, I think some of that is like, because nobody is paying me to be there, and like they're my friends and I also need them like for so many reasons, that I can't just be like, that's the wrong answer, or like, no, don't do it like that. Like it constantly has to be like this co-creative, and like it wouldn't be fun for me if I didn't also see it as an opportunity to learn, and like as an opportunity to learn when like maybe we disagree on what we should plant here or how often we should water it or something like that. But okay, let's make it an experiment, because like I can only tell you what my experience is, and I have 12 seasons of experience and you have 3, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. It also doesn't mean that I'm right this year, because there's so many variables. So there's a lot of like, okay, let's, and it's not like a passive aggressive, like, well, maybe let's just try it both ways. It's like, hey, let's try it both ways, like, or sometimes there's things that I'm just like, what you're saying, I've tried 4 times. I've tried it in a dry summer, and I've tried it in a wet summer, and I've tried it in a cold summer, and I tried it in a hot summer, and it didn't work in any of them. And that's like, I'm not going to leave that conversation so easily because we only have so much space, but like just trying to make sure that like yes, people have access to like part of community, and like maybe like, I mean, I don't want to say intergenerational. I think like the biggest difference, the age difference is maybe like 10 years, but it's like something that can be nice for someone who says 20 to learn from someone who is 30 is 9 years worth of how not to do it. Or, so just being able to be like, like, but then also like balancing, like, when can you explain to somebody that that's not gonna, like, when do you actually have like really good evidence that that's not going to work? When can you explain to somebody simply that it's not going to work? And when do you have to just go through the experience with them and to find out that it doesn't, or maybe that it does work, or maybe that it worked better than you thought it was going to work, even if it didn't work the total way. And that can be, and that's good. And that's like, it's just I mean, I think it's really rewarding. And I think that's kind of just like existing in community basically. But like at the same time, it's like, when it's like every time we're going to do something, folks are like looking to you to like, we'll take your last word on whether or not it should happen. And it's like, well, like, how do I create a system where we don't take my last word, but my word is heard, you know? I think that's really important. And then I think like another way that I've tried to like meet that challenge is like with seed saving, you know, that whole like what is the like imposter syndrome, but it's like fake it till you make it, that sort of thing. I don't like faking it till you make it. I don't want somebody selling me something that they don't actually know or they didn't actually make, you know. But sometimes you do have to fake it till you make it, like if it's not already there. So like with seed saving, you know, like I was super intimidated. I went to like a 10-day course, got inspired, but didn't really like learn the hands-on things I needed to learn. So then I was kind of, and still am kind of like faking it till I make it. But if you come to seed processing days, you'll totally learn some good stuff. But like, there's so much about seed saving and farming. Like, you know, I think Valerie, to like your point of like, what is traditional? Like the word traditional isn't the same as like Western, like, you know, US way of doing it, or, you know, settler mentality of doing it. But like in farming, there's like a lot of different approaches, and there's like, you know, there's a traditional approach, and there's like a settler approach, and there's you know, descendant of the settler who wants to go back to the tradition approach. And they're all really different, and there is something good in all of them. There is something interesting and definitely something worth learning in all of them. But there's lots of different approaches, and just because you don't take those same approach as somebody doesn't mean that you can't learn something from their approach. But just with seed saving, there are so many approaches, and you know, I'm kind of trying to approach it in a way that furthers my values, furthers the community values. But there's so much to learn. And so one thing that we've kind of done is say like, okay, like, let's do this together. So like everybody pick a plant, and you're going to plant that plant out this year, and you are going to observe that plant. And when it comes to seed processing days, you're going to go look it up on the internet, and you're going to see that like, this is how you're supposed to process mustard seeds. And then you're going to troubleshoot it the day before seed processing days. And then you're going to like be in charge of a group, and you all are going to be the new mustard seed winnowing experts of Omaha, Nebraska. And then, and we might not know it perfect, but next year we're going to look to you to see how we should do it. And we're going to build upon the knowledge that you all founded this year, because like, I'm going to be working on eggplants, and you're going to be working on mustard, and somebody else is going to be working on beans. And it's kind of an exciting place to be right now, because like, it's one of those things where it's like, you have enough knowledge to like make mistakes, or, you know, like, or enough knowledge to be dangerous. But in this case, it's not be dangerous. It's like, you have enough knowledge to like know how to start, but there's so much to learn at like every step, that like when we do the seed processing days, it's really exciting, because like everybody is co-creating knowledge at that place. And so I think like a big part of that is like just being able to admit like, I don't know everything publicly, like just being like, I don't know everything, but I am willing to kind of like take on the majority of holding space, and I'm willing to make sure that this gets communicated, and kind of like be like the project manager sort of situation.
You guys, yeah, there's so much stuff coming together, I feel like, and we could go on probably for like at least 4 more hours. But I think before I start asking any other questions we have written down, let's see if there's questions from any audience members. And if not, then we can move forward with what we've got. But I want to see if anybody has anything they want to know. Did we get any in the chat, Peter? Okay, if anybody wants to, you can use the question and answer little function, or you can use the chat. If you want to ask a question in the next, couple minutes, I'll ask one of my questions, and if you think of one, type it in so we can cover it. But yeah, so the next thing, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, your different experiences with the economics of learning and the motivation to become a stable society member, whatever that means, and education feeling like one of the routes to that, different kinds of education, but sometimes institutional. And it sounds like, the link between funding a livelihood and performing a certain way, being strong in some context, and then the link between it being free and feeling freeing. I just think that's an interesting kind of like interplay. So one of our questions was about the economics of entering these spaces and how creating or reclaiming more human scaled, collective, collaborative methods of education, how does that impact the participants' economic reality, teachers, learners, how people carry the knowledge out. So yeah, if you have anything to add to this discussion about the ways that modifying our approach to education or reclaiming old approaches to education can impact us economically in whatever direction.
I don't know. I mean, I think I know what you want me to talk about here. But I think like a lot of what like we're trying to do in the projects that like I'm working on is very much like kind of like sovereignty projects, like learning to grow food, learning to save seed. And like I think another thing about that is, and this might be like a little too apocalyptic, but like I definitely save like quite a bit of money on food in the summer, and or like April through September, something like that. But it's not the sort of thing where and we do have like, we're getting better at like having stuff like for the winter and stuff like that. But to some extent, it's like the thing that we're really learning is like how to cooperate and how to pivot. I said that word earlier, but how to cooperate, how to adapt, how to work together, how to communicate. Like those are the big things. And I don't know that it affects any of us economically, like in the moment, except for that, like maybe we save like $40 on produce or something like that a week. But I see it as like building resiliency like into our community so that like when shocks happen, we don't have to just stand there in shock. We're kind of like, either we have some sort of like autonomous infrastructure that we've built that we can like go off of, and or we at least have the ability to like, well, we know who we can call that is going to show up, and we know that so-and-so has these tools, and we know that so-and-so thinks really good on their feet here, and so-and-so like has space. And so I think that like that is kind of a thing, is that like as things like change and like maybe at times there's like big shocks and those changes are radical, we're able to adapt to those changes. And if we can't adapt to them in exactly the thing that we're doing, like growing food, we can use the other skills that we've built with the growing food as kind of like the project, but it was to teach us all these other skills, And so I don't know if that's necessarily like economic impact, but that is definitely like a thing that I feel. And then the other thing is that like we also have this like almanac. I'm just shameless with the plugs. We also have this almanac that we're putting together. We just did one in 2023, and we're getting ready to do another one that will be published in 2024. And we're taking submissions now. But like the idea is that it's got like the seed catalog in it, but also it's like if you're working on a project share your project idea in the almanac, and like hopefully like collaborations come through that. And so like as far as like monetary, I don't know that it's going to bring monetary success, but I do think that it can help projects to be realized and to get more perspective on them. And at least that's like the hope of how that works.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify, in the same way we've been talking about the impacts of language and kind of like our ideas about what words mean earlier, I think it's important that we do think of the possibility of having an economics that exists outside of capitalism, you know, right? And that's something I've learned newly in the last couple of years. So I definitely think that what you're talking about, Alex, is forming an economy. You know, it's like, if you know what your supply chain is and all of it happens without money, that's a workable economy, you know? So yeah, any of these responses can completely just like set aside there being a monetary value to any of this knowledge.
I guess like I think that what I'm interested in doing, you know, through my platform, Vocational Poetics, which is like, I don't know, addressing assumptions about like the value of work. And by that, I mean, like, not only how we value creative work, but also, I don't know, like thinking about work as redemptive when it's not. And I think like also the kind of gatekeeping that happens with creative work in institutional spaces, and, you know, that work in process is not like valued, right? Or like it is, sorry, my dog is freaking out right now, if anyone can hear her, I'm sorry. Yeah, like I don't know, I feel like a friend described it as like respecting the base layer for what it is. And I'm personally really interested in like a process-based approach to creative work and learning that makes space for that. And then, you know, outside of that sort of more like theoretical question about value and work, like continually changing the material conditions is what's going to like make this kind of work possible. I'm still figuring out like what that looks like for vocational poetics. You know, so like I've only been doing this for not quite a year, and so far like I've done most of it. and I just don't feel like I can ask people for labor without compensating them, right? Like obviously if I've been able to compensate my guest teachers, and that's felt really great, like that feels so good. But yeah, like I am like wanting to move toward a space where like my labor is compensated, everyone's labor is compensated, but also there's some work that we're just doing, right? Because we're creating a resource. And like that is the sort of like larger picture lean right now, is to create a resource for people. And this might be like pre-recorded videos, and as well as like, or like asynchronous versus synchronous material, but the people who, you know, aren't interested or aren't able in pursuing an MFA, or people that have that background but are looking for that kind of community, have access to and can sort of co-develop, kind of following June Jordan's Poetry for the People model, and like the idea of like students becoming teachers and flattening that hierarchy, feels like one way of disrupting the current economy around that education.
I just wanted to add that what I love in hearing both Cass and Alex talk, and the way they've been sharing about what they do and their perspectives on it, to me, when you're asking about sort of the economic impact that education, institutionalized or non-institutionalized education, can have, and it's all wrapped up in value and worth and stuff to some degree, but the way they're talking about it, and the thing that I really think about it and I'm striving for is, again, breaking that, I don't want to say breaking, building an economic of identity, of shared identity, which is built on things like the way you both are talking is shared respect, like ultimately fundamental. I joke half the time that the Anishinaabe way of life, we were given one charge by the creator, and that was to be a good relative. That's it. There aren't 10 commandments. There aren't like this laundry list of do's and don'ts. We were given the gifts of the 7 grandfathers, which are to-dos, was love, bravery, wisdom, respect, honor, humility, and wisdom. So it was kind of one of those, like, be a good relative, and here's how you do it. And with the economic impact, I keep thinking like, and there are studies that already corroborate this when they talk about diversity. If we're even looking at a capitalist system, that diversity is strengthening, that, you know, a broad range of experiences, what Alex is saying, of ages, and that idea of like, just because you're 15 years into the career versus 2 doesn't necessarily have to be hierarchical in that respect, where it's more of a communal sense. That's the part that I'm curious about, because it's an economy where we are not centering money anymore. Right now, we live in a time when money is important. That is how that's how our life is structured, and that's where we are, particularly living in the United States, right? But in the beginning of broadening that back out, and even to be honest, even settler mindsets, you did not survive well in the prairie if you did not have the community to help chop down the building or chop down the wood. You know what I mean? Like, to really rely on who's got what team of horses to do X, Y, and Z. So it's not even necessarily we can like hold the colonial context responsible, but really being able to step back. And I think that's actually what we're talking about, is building these really, what to me are fundamental ways of being, that then our economy reflects that, rather than centering it the other way around. And I would love to sit with both Cass and Alex and learn from them and be in their learning spaces, because also what I really admire about you both and the way you're sharing and talking about teaching and learning, because one thing we haven't talked about is student expectations right now are also a huge thing that you have to contend with in any sort of, whether it's institutional or not, is what baggage and expectations students are coming in with. But there has to be a giant lack of ego to be able to say, I don't know, or to be able to say, I love you, that's really sweet, but no, in this instance, I really do know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? Or to be able to, like you were saying, like, fake it till you make it, because you just haven't done it often enough. But without having the imposter syndrome kick in, and without having the self-doubt and the self-worth conversations, because at some point we all understand that we're all in that space. So does that make sense, kind of how I'm trying to describe that? Like that's the part that I've really come to realize, that both as a parent, but as what I wish I had as a parent, and what I wish our teachers were empowered and had the ability to do, because you want to talk about overworked in the public school system, was to really learn how to be a good human. Like, my girls are in middle school, and I joke that God bless anybody who teaches middle school, because academics in those years, like, just forget about it. Can we like literally have a here's how to be a good human class? Here's a let's go make a cake class. Can we go play recess some more, because the adrenal wash, like, it's just, but really having that be, rather than what is your degree, what's the value of degree, so you can make a whole bunch of money because you have a bunch of letters after your name. And that's coming from someone who values letters after her name. Like, I love higher education and all the wheels and working and stuff, but that's just me, and that's just my personality. So
Yes, so I'm hearing that the kind of common theme I'm hearing is that relationships and the way people relate to each other in these spaces, if we can make that more important than a transactional trade between faked expertise and a salary, or a bunch of tuition and a piece of paper that will then get something, like, we're working on transactions in a lot of institutions now. And if we could break that into working on relationship, then what we get out of the interactions we have would be more impactful, more legitimate, more relevant, because we would be facing each other as human beings and not as a boss and an employee, or a student and a teacher, or, you know, the dean and a adjunct, or, you know, whatever.
The silo.
We're looking at a common goal, and our common goal means that we look to everybody in the room for what they have to contribute, not for what it looks like they have, or what somebody else decided to stamp on them, or whatever. Yeah, cool. We didn't have really any we didn't have any chat or Q&A, except for someone asked if Alex was cutting garlic. So so it seems like we've done a pretty good job. We could just wrap up here because it's 8 o'clock, but in the interest of just like, we all want to go over time. I know we want to go over time. So we're going to spend just a little bit of time. Everybody can go around and just talk about what you're excited about next in your practice, whatever that practice is. And yeah, just something exciting, you know, a couple minutes.
Yeah, I'll talk about it. Yeah, really excited for, so I just learned how to hand pollinate corn, and I also just learned how to make a hybrid, like through years of plant breeding. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where I was like, there's different methods to do things, different ways to do things, and it's not something that I really like care to focus on so much, but it's definitely something that I want to learn how to do and like have the understanding of, to like be able to talk about it. Or I don't know, maybe one day I do want to make my own variety that way. But that was really exciting because it was like this whole series of events that led me to like this like random farm in Indiana, learning from this guy that I had never met how to cross pollinate corn. And, you know, as soon as we jump off here, I'm heading down to one of our lots because I've got corn that's tasseling. And we're gonna do like the first step, you know, me and a couple folks that are like also involved in our projects are gonna do it together. And so I'm gonna do that part where I'm like, and then once you learn it, you gotta tell other people how to do it. So I'm pretty excited about that, and just like excited about like finding more people and making more connections through like shared interests, and being able to like, yeah, grow community that way, but not just locally, but like have like wider reach. I think like one way that I talk about like the seed co-op especially is that it's like, we're not trying to be self-sufficient. We're not trying to be community sufficient. We're just trying to be like a vibrant node in an interconnected, in like a thriving interconnected network of folks who are just creating their own communities. And so I feel like that was something that like kind of came through pretty hard just in the last couple of weeks, and looking forward to like expanding that.
I'll go next. So a couple of things. In September, I'm teaching a series called Adjusting the Signal, and it's a 3-part series offered in conjunction with Regis University, which has a low-res MFA program here in Denver. And the series includes trauma-informed creative writing workshop facilitation, community-engaged grant writing, and community-engaged syllabus creation, including resources for those who want to begin their own community-based arts education project. So that's available through the website, and there's a sliding scale for that, and reach out if any of that is inaccessible, of course. Otherwise, Vocational Poetics just received its first sort of, I don't know, we'll call it investment from a donor, which is very exciting and is going to go toward some web design, as well as scholarships, because I can't pretend that I like, yeah, the website is what it is right now. I did my best, and also it needs more. And then, you know, applying for grants to create funding for creating open educational resources through which I can, pay writers, artists, and teachers for their labor, the people who create those. So I'm excited about all those things. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm twofold, maybe threefold excited. I'm in the process of birthing a book and writing specifically about decolonizing or hashtag indigenizing practices and creative practices. And it's born out of the work I've done for the past 10 years of really examining the paradigms and processes in Western, particularly American education and the profession. It's born from my experience as a fashion and costume designer, but a lot of the through lines kind of hit all the creative disciplines and just reframing and recontextualizing and sort of working those practices. And Alternate Currents has a little book coming up that we're working on as a collective. So I've been having fun playing with that and kind of trying to figure out what my submission for that will be. In amongst juggling, I have a show out at the McCarter Theater in New Jersey that's getting underway, which is a really great piece called Bull Rusher. And you'll just have to look it up because it's a beautiful story and I can't synopsize it. But after all of that, threefold, I'm looking forward to getting back into the studio because they have a couple of large scale textile works. I work in the ribbon work tradition and fabric tradition, and I'm like dying to just get back to that because you hang it up because you're like, I gotta go pay the bills, and then like now I just I'm itchy. So I'm looking forward to actually getting back into my studio and working on some of those projects to see where they take me.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here and having this really amazing discussion. And we'll close it out. If we have any, links and stuff that need to go to Peter so people can check it out once this video hits the web, we'll get all that sorted out so you can, if you were interested in the almanac or you're interested in vocational poetics or you're interested in this play, these productions that Valerie's talking about, then you can go to the website, the Amplify website. Cool. All right. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, Amanda.
Miigwech, thank you.